Here in the podcast, we've talked a lot about different strategies and techniques to start a successful, profitable business. But what we haven't talked about is kind of the elephant in the room in that you can acquire a profitable business with very little risk. And what we're going to talk about is how exactly you do this. Currently, there are thousands of businesses that are available that are up for grabs. But how do you know which one find which one is profitable and which one's not? I'm joined by my good friend and repeat guest, Alex Nghiem, on this episode of Bootstrap MD. Hey guys, it's Dr. Mike Wu Ming with Bootstrap MD. Today we've got a special treat. This is actually my first repeat guest that I've had on the podcast. Alex and I have been friends for years. I recently got involved in his mastermind about helping to acquire businesses. One of the most difficult things that you can do is starting your own business. And what Alex does is he helps individuals and with his partner acquire businesses for not only growth, but expanding your empire. Alex, first of all, thanks for being on the call today. Really
Hey, I'm excited to be here, Mike. Always a pleasure.
I want to give you a kind of a quick bio. If you haven't heard of Alex before, he spoke at one of my events. He's been on my podcast. Alex helps his clients build seven-figure expert businesses with a focus on programs anywhere between $5,000 to $100,000 per sale. He's generated over $50 million of sales for his clients, who include Sally Hogshead, Scott Hallman, Vin Cardillo, who's now his partner, Larry Benet. And recently, Alex and Vin have started this, I don't know if it's a group or a mastermind, it's called Acquire to Grow. And what Acquire to Grow does is it helps small business owners add at least $1 million to their growth via acquisitions. Combined, they've bought and advised over 80 transactions and have exited 4 different times. So I wanted to get that in, Alex, because I know you got a big ego, and
I know, man. My head can barely fit this room.
Very, very humble guy. So I've been talking a lot about acquisitions with my folks. Many doctors are interested in either they have a practice and wanted to grow, or they're looking to start a practice. And as I've said many times, it's very difficult to actually start up a business if you don't know what you're doing. Recently I was talking with a colleague of mine who we have a friend who has just been under stress. He's starting his own business, and unfortunately he's had no experience with business, and he's really stressed out, and he's probably going to look to actually just exiting it and selling it. And one of the things that you and Vin have taught me is about acquiring businesses that are already making money.
Yep.
So I've got a few questions from it, but I think maybe you can help define exactly what are acquisitions and if there are any misconceptions or myths about that word.
Sure. So, sometimes we heard the word acquisitions, we think kind of like Wall Street, Wall Street public companies and all that. And of course, they do a fair amount of acquisitions too. One of the things that Vin and I committed doing is to showing small business owners. And we define a small business owner as between, probably between $1 million and 20 million. If you're under $1 million, you can still do an acquisition. It's going to be tougher because, your resources are probably a lot harder. If you're starting out, certainly, you don't necessarily need to buy $1 million business. So we'll just kind of use that as parameters. So let's just say, $500,000 up, somewhere around 5-10 million, somewhere around there. We're not talking about $100 million acquisition. Let's just kind of get that out of the way. The other thing that I've also found is that helps people get their head around this is, technically speaking, even though we're talking about an acquisition, we're talking about buying the assets of the company. That also makes people a lot more reassured because they say, I bought a house before, I bought a car before. In fact, you're on the West Coast, I would argue maybe, some businesses may be cheaper than a house on the West Coast, right? Mm-hmm. So that helps people, not get so intimidated. So let's get that, real quick. So I would say that the biggest misconception most people have is that they think that, again, they have to be just gigantic behemoths, like some Wall Street company that's got billions of dollars at their disposal. And really, there's nothing further from the truth. In fact, if you look at the high failure rate of entrepreneurship, I would say that in many cases, that it actually makes a lot more sense to buy a business than it actually start one. And so the biggest misconception people have about doing business, doing acquisition is extraordinarily risky, right? Like a lot of things in business, there's some risk, but statistically, when you pick a business properly, and it fits the right parameters, you could skip the highest failure rate, which is usually between year 1 and year 3. And in fact, we'll get to this a little bit later, but in many cases, especially if you're going to go after bank financing, you can have a much easier time actually getting financing for an existing business than you ever will for new business. Mainly because of the fact that, especially if you've been around for 3 years, because that's usually the first thing they ask is like, if this thing have the operating history? Well, if you open up a new location, the first thing they say, well, I don't have the operating history. So both sides are kind of taking, a pretty big, pretty big roll of the dice. Whereas when you take a business already up and running, even if it's declining, at least there's some operating history, especially if you can improve it. So I would say those are probably the biggest misconception. Two biggest one is that they think you have to be, $100 million company or some public company to do it. Or the second one is the fact that it's a lot riskier than starting a new venture. And I would say the media is kind of guilty of this. They portray this like they want to create this romanticized version of starting your own business against all odds. I'm 52. I've had enough bruises and been enough challenges to starting something new. So now where possible, we actually look at starting a company. And in fact, this is a kind of like obscure anecdote, Mike. I know you have a Tesla. What most people don't realize is that, Elon Musk didn't start Tesla.
Right.
He actually bought it.
Yeah, that's
he
right.
came as an investor and he grew it. Yeah, because, that's also something else as well. And in fact, a lot of it, I have an iPhone, and a lot of the technologies on an iPhone, not the software, but a lot of the touchscreen specifically, Apple didn't invent. They acquired that. So, we can get into more, but that, I would say for our audience, those are two biggest ones is, you don't have to be a Wall Street company. You don't need, it's a lot less risky than one might think.
Yeah, of course, as we're both entrepreneurs, we're probably always guilty of ourselves about romanticizing the business, and, take it from nothing and grow it, right? And,
right.
So why do you think it's easier to acquire a business than actually starting out on its own? I mean, we touched on a few topics today, but maybe you could expand on that.
Sure. So I know a lot of your audience are, basically are online marketers, and also a number of them are also medical doctors. I'll use, an example that both can relate to. And this is partly the reason I think why you came on board with us is, especially in the medical field, a lot of folks right now are either disenchanted or they're getting older. And so many times they're far more likely to give you a really great price on it, right? Because they're, they're in their 50s or 60s. Usually that's it's not as common, people in their 40s, but in their 50s or 60s, it's only about their 70s for crying out loud. So they're far more likely to give you what's called seller financing, right? And what that means is that the seller now is incentivized to effectively be the bank, you see? And so, we've had cases, we've done it personally, and we've also had clients do this as well, where, they get 10%, 20%, in some extreme cases over, 50%. I know a couple of cases where they got it, close to 100%. What that basically means that the seller is, because they're so incentivized to get rid of it, they actually provide you as a bank. Now think about that for a second, right? You don't have to put up, again, I'm not saying all deals are 100% financed with the seller, but any percentage they give you is less dollar you have to basically, basically qualify it at a bank. So the question becomes like, why would they do this? Well, this is a very, fragmented and very inefficient market. I'm not saying there's a criticism. I'm saying that's just a term that people use in the financial market, meaning that if you and I basically have a share of IBM stock, it's pretty much universally agreed, on the public stock market at what that thing is worth, right? With a small business like this, most of the time it's the seller's motivation that determines the price, right? If they have an illness, if they have an illness, or their spouse, because a lot of these are usually run as a husband and wife, even if it's not full time, they help out in some capacity, or a parent, right? Especially during their 50s or something. Any one of those incidents happen, money that the price, getting the highest price, then usually doesn't become the main driving factor for them. It's like, we want to get out as quickly as possible. They're not going to suddenly basically, sell it to you at 2 cents on the dollar, mind you, but they're going to be far more motivated because they have something else that demands their attention. And so a lot of those cases, that's what we're seeing, right? And, especially in the U.S., the statistics are mind-boggling. Right now, this period is called the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of the world, right? Over the next 15 years, it's estimated almost 75 million baby boomers will retire. And statistically, 40% of baby boomers are small business owners. So that means, the math is like 11,000 baby boomers are retiring roughly every day for the next 15 years. And not every one of them is going to be a desirable business, but I mean, I suspect most people listening to this, they're going to go buy 1,000 business, right? They just have to buy one or two. But the amount of business coming right now available is just staggering.
Mm.
And that's just in the offline market. If people are really interested in living in the online world, I'll spend maybe 30 seconds on that, is people are creating digital assets all the time that they don't know what the value of it is. They'll create like something out of passion. They'll go create like, a 20,000 person Facebook group on wellness or diet. Well, for crying out loud, if you have a wellness clinic, imagine how valuable that is. These, whoever started is now a medical doctor. They just maybe they enjoy a certain lifestyle. They create this thing, and you come along and say, well, I'll give you, a percentage of every sale that I make, or over time, I like to own this. Start with maybe, but outright, do this. And I don't know if he's shared this publicly, so I'll just use his initials, but this is actually how a very, his initials are BB. He's in the self-development space. I think most people figure out who it is. It's not Tony Robbins. This is actually how he grew his business, like by heads and shoulders above everybody else. He just went and approached a bunch of Facebook group owners who writes, who loves creating quotes, positive, quotes. Mm-hmm. And of course on Facebook, some of those groups get into the millions, right? But the seller of those things, they're like, I'm just doing this for fun, or enjoy it. And so this fellow was really forward thinking. He went and approached a lot of these group owners, and he basically made them an offer for, I think, a couple $1,000s. And over time, he's added like hundreds of thousands. I mean, you and I both know this, right? I mean, he's added hundreds of thousands of emails to his list. And I'm like, imagine going to Google or Facebook and buying that much traffic. You couldn't do it. Right. And so those are, different. So I guess my point is that there's a lot of inefficiency in the market, which works in our favor as a buyer. You see, so the key is like, there's a lot of businesses coming on, basically being available, especially in the brick and mortar. So this is really relevant if you have, say, for example, and I think in fact, when you came to our workshop, that's, you pull up a practice, right? Like somebody was mentioning that, they were looking at just basically stepping down to retiring. The longer they wait, the harder it's for them to retire.
Right.
And so, and of course we can't turn back time, at least not as of now.
Not yet.
So
not yet.
Right. And that's a very big motivation, right? Once people get a certain age, money is not the most important thing. They just want to kind of move on with their life. So
I think that's an interesting point because, if someone who is new to all of this, I always thought that businesses are selling it because, it's a losing business or it's a dying business and they just want to get out, which can be for some cases. But I think as you mentioned, since you've helped, I've just kind of, started to look around, most of them are either retiring or they have a change and transition in life. I think one was she was a nurse practitioner who wanted to have a family. So she wanted to sell, a business. So like you said, and these are profitable businesses. These are businesses. Oh, yeah. What you showed us, these are businesses that are already making money. Mm-hmm. So you're not starting from scratch or starting in debt once you get started. So that was an interesting point.
Right. And you actually, I'm sorry. You brought up a point that's very valuable to it, which I didn't have a chance to touch on. You want to buy a business that the other thing is when you buy a business, you have instant cash flow, right? You've owned multiple clinics, Mike. So several people here probably looked at opening up a location. It's not uncommon to spend 6 months, some case 12 months, some extreme case maybe 18 months where you see your first dollar. And unless you have another source of income, you can't do it. I interviewed a gentleman that basically he's owned, he owns like 33 different, he's the largest franchisee of a national seafood chain, and he used to be a banker. And his thing was like, the first location can always be a dud. And if that first location is a dud, because, you spent 12, 18 months building it out, it's almost impossible to get financing for the second one. So they came out of the gate and I'm trying to buy a franchise. Opening a franchise location. They went and bought 4 locations that were already up and running. And then within 6 months, they demonstrated they could operate those, and then they quickly basically use that. And so you're skipping basically the riskiest part, because you and I both know one of the hardest things about business is, does anybody even care that this product or service exists, right? Well, the business has been around for 2 or 3 years, even it's kind of flatlined and declining a little bit. They've kind of overcome that. Because you could spend 12, 18 months trying to figure out, well, does anybody even care? This thing is in the market. So.
Yeah, and I think that makes a good point too. I mean, I mentioned even before, I joined your group, is that, I know some doctors who own multiple clinics, but then when you tell me what they're actually doing, it doesn't they're still working 3 times as hard. So I say, well,
Right.
how's your clinic? I've got 3 clinics. The doctor will say, I've got 3 clinics. And in Clinic A, I work Mondays, Tuesdays. Clinic B, I work Wednesday, Thursdays. And on Fridays, I drive 20 miles to, clinic number 3. And I go, well, you're just doing the same business, but you're multiplying yourself 3 times.
Right.
I'd rather have it where at clinic, they already have a staff, they already have somebody in place, patients. So you're just coming in there maybe once a month or maybe once a year. That's a much better,
Right.
more attractive to me than having to drive to 3 different clinics.
Right, and this is also I'll share a story here, then we can move on. But I know I have I recently made the acquaintance of, he's becoming a good friend. He said, he's in his 30s right now, right? Well, when he first got out of dental school, I mean, it's not like the guy's flush with cash, right? He's an immigrant, had some money saved up, but he couldn't begin to, he works at a dental clinic. So for him, like you said, he'd work for somebody for, like maybe a year, and he said, well, I want to own my own practice. And let's just say he even had the money, which he didn't, but even had the money, his bigger concern he has, like, I don't have enough experience to run go actually even know what roles to hire. He'd only been working something for a year. And so the reason he wanted to buy a practice was because then the staff's already in there. They've been trained by the previous owner. So in his case, what happened was he found a satellite location, right? It was owned by, so basically this doctor, kind of like the flip side of what you're saying, this doctor had this dentist had 2 locations. One was the main office, the other was a satellite office. The satellite office was getting a lot of love. They had a staff, but they just weren't getting the attention of the owner. And so it's just kind of going along like this. So he stepped in, gave this guy owner who, over time just wanted to get rid of it, got a really sweet deal, grew the thing, and then used that money to buy a second practice. But the point is, like, this owner had already invested in the build out, all the equipment, all the staff and everything. And because his motivation is, I don't want to go back and forth like this. And so he owner finances a significant portion of this. Keep in mind, this guy's barely a year out of dental school. So it's not like he's sitting on $500,000, right? So that's the other thing as well. Like, again, it's the owners of these, they're not, money obviously is always a factor, but they're not trying to get the maximum price if there's something else going on in their life, which, creates a lot of bargains.
And so we touched about it. And of course, it always comes down to the money.
Sure.
If you've been said, you don't need a lot. And you really introduced me to this owner financing that I was still, naive about all that. We hear all the times, banks are not lending money, if you wanted to start a business. I've seen it from some of my clients who get rejected from banks. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about what this owner financing or seller financing is all about.
Sure. So the owner financing just means that the seller is acting as a bank, right? That's where sometimes you use the term seller finance, owner financing. It's interchangeable. And the biggest thing about that is that the seller is motivated to basically provide, some percentage of that sales price. Sometimes usually between 10 to 30%, but it is sufficiently motivated. I've seen 50% or even higher. What that basically means for the buyers now is, like, basically they're not going to sit there and, put you through the ringer, because they're motivated to basically, get it off, their plate. So we have a saying that says we want to find a motivated seller of a good business, right? Because there's another approach which is way more tricky to pull off, which is buying distressed business that kind of, fallen out of favor, and you got to go in there and do a turnaround. That's very complex and very risky. That's not what I mean. I mean like a business that's doing, like I said, profitable, or at least, break even, ideally more profitable. That's a better situation. But the seller situation is their motivation. That's why they're basically doing this, right? And now here's something that a lot of folks don't realize. See, this is why you really, really want to understand. This is a little bit human psychology, right? So, willing to spend a little bit extra time and understand human psychology will pay off in spades. And here's what I mean. A lot of these folks, especially during their say in their 50s and 60s, they've been running this business for 10 to 20 years. So for them, the biggest concern that they have, that you really want to, zone in on, is they want their staff and their customer base to be taken care of. Because remember, this is like especially a brick and mortar business, right? It's in the community. The last thing they want to do is sell to some nameless corporation and basically have it come and gut the place or change, take the sign down, you see? So that's a big reason also why they're willing to provide this owner financing. But back to your point, the owner financing is driven by the seller's motivation. And it just means that they're willing to finance, sometimes they call it carry a note. That just means that they're, basically the lender of that money. And I've seen cases, where it's below market. I've seen cases, the sophisticated sellers are going to probably ask maybe 1 or 2% higher than the interest rate. I've also seen cases where it's 0%. I mean, imagine that, basically you get, let's just say you can get, the seller to basically carry 30-40% of the sales price, and they're doing it for 0%. And, 5 to 10 years is not uncommon. So that basically dramatically lowers the amount of money you have to qualify. Now the bank, they're going to want to basically put at least some percentage of that, especially if you're going to go bank financing. But keep in mind that most of the time, especially if you qualify for an SBA loan, Small Business Administration loan, they may only require 10%. So let's just say you're looking at buying $500,000 business. We'll just use napkin math. I mean, in this time that we have, this will give somebody something that may think that they're not approachable, right? So you find a $500,000 business. That probably means depending on, businesses are usually sold as a multiple profit. That's another conversation. I don't want to belabor the point, but let's just say that the sales price is $500,000, right? And then let's just say you can get the owner to carry, say, 40% of that, which means it's $200,000. So now basically you have to qualify for $300,000. Well, if the bank's asking for 10%, that means you're putting up $30,000 to buy a business that's $500,000. Now, depending on what industry you're in, how stable it is or whatever, that business is probably doing between $100,000 to $250,000 in profit. You just spent $30,000 to buy a business that's up and running that's doing between $100,000 to $250,000 of profit.
Right.
I mean, imagine. I mean, and it's, you could step into it in the next 30, 60 days, depending on how long it takes to close, do the paperwork. I don't know about you. I mean, you and I are, around people that do stuff pretty fast, but even on the internet time, getting a business to do $100,000, $250,000 in 30, 60 days, it's, pretty much impossible for all practical purposes, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so attractive is that you're getting revenue from the business each and
day
every
one.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you're just basically, okay, you're funneling back to the seller financing. And so that's you've got that covered, depending, of course.
Right. And on the presentation we did about a week or two ago, we went through a lot more math, but basically the concerns have, well, I still got to pay the bank. I can assure you that, while you have to pay back that money, the cash flow from that more than cover that and still, basically give you a pretty good income. Whereas, as you and I both know, they went, regardless of what industry, in medical or not, if you're going to start a new location, just to bill out all the overhead and everything, you're lucky you can be pulling $1 out within 12 to 18 months.
Right. Or longer.
Right.
The average is
12 to 18 is pretty conservative.
Yeah. So there are businesses out there. They're out there, but how do you find those businesses, or how do you identify, which are the right business to purchase?
Sure. So this is a kind of like a multiple, so I'll go slowly so, the person who's watching or listening to this can kind of write this down. So the first thing you want to do is really take an inventory and be candid with yourself. What are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing, right? It sounds a little bit cliched, almost like, kind of like that book that we went through in college, What Color's Your Parachute? Figure out what you enjoy doing. It's almost like you're doing a little bit of introspection here, right? So for example, if like I recently spoke with a gentleman who's looking at buying a business, I just asked him candidly, what are your strengths? Say, well, I'm really good with operations and, marketing, not so good in sales and not so good. So that helps identify a little bit, right? What additional roles, he needs to round out, or at least skills he gets. So if you're already in the medical industry, unless you just flat out want to leave it, odds are it's probably you're trying your best, it's probably in your best interest to stay at least in an industry that right? Like if I were to suddenly go buy a medical clinic, the learning curve would be pretty steep, right? I would have to have at least a previous owner stay for a pretty significant amount of time, well, for legal reasons, but even, because a non-medical professional can't own it, but just the learning curve on that's pretty steep. So for me, if I were to go buy a business, I'd probably stick with stuff that I know, which tends to be, marketing companies or consulting companies, or maybe even e-commerce, right? So depending on what industry you already know, because I suspect, people listen to this are probably at least in their 30s. So they probably at least had 5-10 years of experience in some industry already, right? So stay as close as possible to your lane, unless for some reason that industry is imploding, which is why you're leaving. That's probably the only exception. But as much as possible, know what you enjoy doing, what your strengths are, leverage as much as possible your industry experience, and kind of combine those two. So that's on the kind of introspection side. That's the internal stuff. On the external factor, the thing you want to look at is a couple questions you want to ask yourself, right? Is, again, already taking into account what you enjoy doing and whatnot, is if you already have an existing business, ask yourself these couple of simple questions. What Okay, who else are they buying before and after me? Right? Like there was a gentleman that you and I both know, Mike. He's actually a client of yours, and he's going to become a client of ours as well. He's a medical doctor. He was basically discharging people to extended care, and he's kind of like, wait a minute, I've been doing this for like 15 years. So why don't I just look at buying an extended care facility, right? Because he's already basically sending people that way, and so it's like, well, that makes sense, more in to use some jargon that's called the supply chain, right? Like who are they using before me, and who are they using after me, and so if you have an existing location, just ask like, who else are they buying? Let's use something outside medical or online, right? So let's just say that, when we're talking with somebody, they do catering for small businesses. Well, one thing they may want to do is they may be catering and make sandwiches. So another thing they say, well, people may need beverages, so they may want to find a company that basically delivers beverages, or at least bottled water to the same location, because the companies that are ordering water and offices, can be a really good fit for their, catering services, right? And vice versa. Then we're talking about cross pollination and synergies. But that's one easy question to ask: is who else are people using before me, and who else are people using after me? And I have a couple other ones here, just kind of give you a little bit heads up. At the end of this, I'm going to give you a sense of how to download this book. But in here, there's a question in here. Let me just kind of go over a couple other questions in here as well, right? So the other question they have is like, who am I referring a lot of my business to? You see, let's just say that, again, let's use as many examples as possible here. Let's just say that you're doing, basically you're in a photography business, right? And then, they say, well, we also we love to basically do some film, because let's just say that you do a specific type, of photography. And you realize that, wait a minute, I'm sending out, I'm referring a ton of business to this videographer. Why don't I potentially look at buying that company? Because maybe that company I'm referring to, I may get a small 5-10%, but if I own that business, I'm going to get, the vast majority of that, right? So who else are they using in addition to that? And who am I spending a lot of money with? This usually means that you're probably spending a lot of money with a particular supplier or vendor. This one is, I think, a little bit, depending on what industry you're in, I don't recommend it as much, although, it does happen, especially large scale acquisitions. So for example, again, I'm just using it as an example. I'm not using it as a recommended, course per se. But let's just say that, you're a clinic and you're buying a lot of supplies from a particular, company. And the only time I would recommend you basically maybe looking at buying that supplier is because that supplier has something so proprietary that it gives you a huge competitive advantage, and you want to lock out all your other competitors from getting access to that supply. It can't be something, as mundane as they could get anywhere, but they may be providing you something that you say, hey, this is giving me the ability to do something that nobody else can. But if there's everybody else, including my competitor, if I own that, then guess what? Now, I have a lot more competitive advantage. So
Yeah.
the third one is not as common. The first two are more common.
Yeah, and just an aside, but it's a good point. Physicians, we have to be a little bit careful of that, because there are laws against.
Right. That's one reason I kind of proceeded carefully there. Yeah. In the tech, outside the medical industry, there's not as much. But yeah, that's one reason I said the third one is much more rare.
Right.
And it typically is done like when you're really looking at like huge, like really large scale acquisition, sometimes called a roll up. But yeah, it's not as common as the first two.
It makes sense though. But to go into businesses that or you've got relationships with, that you can benefit from, which I gather is one of the big mistakes that you see in acquisitions, is they try to go into businesses where they don't know anything about that business or understand the mechanics of that business. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So we have there's a saying, right? Some people say, oh my God, like, I spent, some time on this thing and I didn't get the deal or whatever. And we always tell people, the only thing worse than not getting the deal is getting the wrong deal. Because buying a car, it's expensive to return it, but trust me, with a business, you definitely want to do, you want to do a lot of due diligence. But yeah, so the common mistakes is usually the biggest one that we've seen, which kind of affects almost everything else, is not really having a clear plan of how you're going to grow the business once you have it. See, most people kind of mistakenly think that, because once they get the adrenaline starts rushing because they want to have brag rights, I bought a business and all that. We always tell people that buying a company or acquiring a business, it's not the end goal. And people are shocked at that. Is that what you guys kind of focus on? So yeah, it's a means to an end. It's an accelerator, right? But if owning the business is going to distract you, or worse, drag down your, cash flow, then what's the point? Like like there's no, as far as I know, there's no award out there for buying, let's just bragging rights. You want to go to brag your friends, but there's no award, right? The bank's not gonna say, oh my God, like, kind of like the joke that Dan Kennedy had, right? Did you work really hard for this money? Well, I'm going to give you an extra 10%. Like you're not going to get like, brownie points because you basically did an acquisition. So you have to have a clear plan. The reason I say this because Vin, my partner, in his early days, he's been doing this since the 90s, right? He basically came guns blazing. He bought, he was literally buying companies, like at the time, I think one a month. And one of the acquisition was really eye-opening for him. He bought a practice, had 13 employees. Within 30 days, 9 of them quit. So as you can imagine, this is pretty devastating, right? So he spent the next 18 months rebuilding the staff. And he said, okay, what happened? Well, basically they came in and they had a plan of how to grow it, but it didn't take into account the human element, right? So that's another thing, we talk about, right? Not having a clear plan. The other one is also forgetting that really at the end of the day, it is a numbers business, but really it's a people business. Like you're buying a business. What is a business ultimately besides the legal definition, right? It's a bunch of people that have got together that's working in unison to basically accomplish a mutually agreed goal, which hopefully is growing the business, make a profit, and provide careers to everybody. If you overlook that, because this is why you hear these horror stories about some big corporation will come in, buy a company, not really care what's there, just kind of, trample over everything that's there, and then people freak out, they quit, right? So that's the other thing that we talk about is also really understanding the human element, right? And then really the other one is also not really having a 3 to 5 year plan. When we work with clients, we always ask them, "What's your 3 to 5 year plan?" They're like, "What does that have to do with anything?" It's like, well, it has everything to do with everything, because if you don't have that, then we can't figure out, well, does this acquisition fit into your 3 to 5 year plan, right? If your goal, for example, just buy one business and basically make that your primary vehicle for making money for the next 3 to 5 years, that's a very different approach than you have 3 locations and you want to buy 5 more so you can exit at some price that you can retire, in your 50s. You see, because we get both ends of the spectrum. So that's one of the reasons why we have to be really, really clear. Like yesterday, we spoke with a company that's doing a decent amount of revenue, and the obvious choice was to grow their core business. But once we dug it a little bit deeper, we realized that, wait a minute, they're in a fairly high, that industry is fairly high risk. So even though that's the easier path, the exposure, the bigger they grow, the more government interference they may run into. So even though it sounds counterintuitive, it made more sense to basically grow this other business that they have that's not as far along, just diversify their risk. Or at least that's what we're looking at both, right? So, but that's why we ask them, say, look, if it's just to grow, then obviously grow the one that already has momentum. But when they say, well, this one, potentially can run to a lot of, there's already some regulatory issues that may prevent it from growing at the speed that we want. We have to know that, right? And then they also both said that, well, we actually want to cash out, make a certain amount of money before we're a certain age. Great. That's also very, a big factor as well. So again, I would say not having a 3 to 5 year plan. And again, it can change, of course, life is life, right? But not having that, just, then there's no North Star, for lack of a better word, to guide, your bigger decisions. Thinking that basically it's all about the money. We talked about this earlier, right? And then basically not take into account that a lot of times the seller motivation is what's is going to drive the price. And while we're on that topic, I'll touch on that and we'll move on. A lot of time people obsess over getting the best price, but what they don't realize that is price and terms, right? So we always recommend clients say, hey, look, you always want to make multiple offers. Look, you want X, I'll give you X if you give me 10 years to pay for it. But I'll give you 80% of X and we can settle it right now.
Right.
Or, you see, so, and some owners, you would think, well, they want all the lump sum, but you and I talked about this, when you came to our event in Dallas, Mike. Some folks are at a stage in their life where they'd rather have, that monthly payment. Right. So it works in your favor because even though you're paying a little bit more, it helps your cash flow. You see, so you don't know what they want until you walk into it. And then the biggest mistake you make is thinking that you know what they want. This is not like, buying a public company. You open the page, okay, well, it's worth X amount of shares. I buy that. It's not that. And again, when you understand that inefficiency, it really works in your favor when you're buying a company.
Everything is negotiable.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, we didn't have time to even touch on everything on here. I know you wanted our audience you have a gift for our audience.
Sure.
Learn more about that.
Yeah, so this book right here, it's we made it so that way it's approachable. Most books on this topic, basically MBA class, like 600, 800 pages. So we intentionally made this thing very, easy to read. It's about 70, 80 pages, and we intentionally made it so that you can read about an hour to 90 minutes. Yeah, so the book is called Growth Through Acquisitions: The 7-Step Process for Growing 300% Faster than Competitors. And we created a special website, Growth Through Acquisitions, sometimes kind of a mouthful. So we created a little bit shorter URL called acquisitions with an S, book.com. Again, that's acquisitionsbook.com. And you could download, a digital copy of this. And again, we intentionally made it so it's very easy to read. It kind of walks people through our 7-step process. It touches on everything we talked about in here, common mistakes, people make, what is the motivation, also how to identify acquisition candidates, and also we have plenty of case studies in here. I think there's 5 different case studies in here from why the buyer bought a company, how they found a company, how they structured the deals and all that. So yeah, there's a lot of very in-depth, getting some people to disclose that in detail wasn't easy.
Right. Well, any last minute thoughts before we end the interview today?
Yeah, I would say that, don't let the phrase, because we see this a lot, right, is don't let the word acquisition kind of intimidate you, right? Basically just think like you're buying the assets of a business, because that's, in a more accounting term, that's really what we're showing you to do, is we're showing you how to basically buy the assets of a company, to be more precise. That I found helps people be a little bit more, less intimidated by the thought, because it's, oh my God, like do I really take what it buys? So, well, think about, you're buying the customer list, you're buying, we rarely recommend you buy the building. In fact, that's just for practical sake that we don't really recommend you buy the real estate. So you're buying, pieces of a company that gives you the right to run the business, right? And that basically just allows you to, dramatically cut down on that. And just be open to an idea that on the surface it may sound very counterintuitive, but, once you basically make that subtle shift, so many more options open to you. And that's really all I encourage people to do, just be open-minded about this. And, that could, and depending on where you are in your life, this could save you 3, maybe 5 more years than starting a new business.
Really appreciate you taking the time today, Alex, there. And the website again is acquisitionsbook.com. You can go ahead and get a copy of the Growth Through Acquisitions guide that Alex and Finn, they've got years and years of experience. One thing, guys, that I know about acquiring a business is you don't want to do this by yourself. You need to have someone with experience, a team to help you, whether you go with Alex or you've got people that you can trust. Yeah. It is not an easy process. This is
there's very few things, it's got the old joke, right? There's a couple of times when you don't want to cut corners. One is basically, don't negotiate with your brain surgeon. The other one's don't find the cheapest divorce lawyer. So that's what I meant by saying, if you're planning on doing this, you don't have to work with us, but please do not do this on your own, because when it's done right, it can literally change your life. When it's done wrong, it can also literally change your life, but not in a positive way. So this is definitely not something you can do, at least my experience, just watching videos or whatever. There's just too many nuances to it. So.
Again, acquisitionsbook.com is where you're going to go. We'll put a link here on the podcast, and you can go check that out. Alex, thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoy sharing this with your community, Mike. Always a pleasure.
All right, guys. And as always, whatever you do, don't always look backward. Keep moving forward. Have a great day.